Hello YouTube, and welcome back to this Axis and Allies 1914 tutorial series. We've covered a lot of ground in our series, both looking at the actual historical events leading up to the war and during the war, and then we spent a lot of time looking at the different rules and how they all come into play in terms of combat, in terms of the economy, the movement, and so forth. For this video, we're going to circle back around and take a look at one nation-specific rule that we haven't had a chance to cover yet. That is German unrestricted submarine warfare. That is technically an official rule that is always in the game. Then we are going to take a look at an optional rule included in the book that is the Russian Revolution. And then, I know we've spent a lot of time in this series really is about the out-of-the-box rules, but there is a tournament variant that is kind of similar to Russian Revolution, and so I want to touch on that just a little bit. So when it comes to unrestricted submarine warfare, basically what that means is at any time during the game, Germany can declare that they'll begin unrestricted submarine warfare. Now when this happens, Germany basically gets to potentially take money away from England and the US. Now, Germany doesn't get that income, but it can deprive England and the US of that money. So what does that mean? So basically, on both England as well as the United States' turn, Germany will roll one die for every submarine they have in sea zones 2, 7, and 8. So that is going to be, we've got 7 and 8 out here, actually 2, 7, and 8 out here in the middle of the Atlantic. So for every sub that Germany has over there, it gets to roll a die on England's collect income phase as well as on America. So that's twice every full round. Now what happens after they roll these dice? So for every 1 or 2 that they roll, so you've got about a 33% chance per sub, 1 IPC gets deducted from England's production, and then when the US is doing its collect income phase, Germany will roll again for all of its subs. Maybe it still has all of them that had on England's turn, maybe a couple of them have been sunk, but you'll roll for England on England's collect income phase, so whatever subs you have at that point, you roll for them. And then on the US, you look at what subs you have at that point in the game, in those territories, and you will roll for those. And for every roll of a 1 or 2, so again, that's about a 33% chance. So out of 3 subs, for every 3 subs, you should be able to pick off 1 IPC from both of these countries on average. You can go ahead and do that. Now, this does have the added disadvantage of automatically bringing the US into the war. Now, if the US is going to enter the war on their turn anyway, then, and Germany has submarines, there's no reason for them not to declare unrestricted submarine warfare. However, if the US is still a couple turns away, even if they're just 1 turn away, that is something that Germany is going to have to think about. Do they want to bring America in a turn early? Is the benefit going to be great enough? And they're going to have to look at how many subs they have, not just how many they have, but how many are in these particular territories, and how many do they think they can keep around for a few rounds. And then they can make that decision. So that is always a rule that's at play. But now let's look at an optional rule. And for that, instead of being focused on England and the US over there, we're going to be focused on Russia. Now we know historically Russia did drop out of the war because of an internal Bolshevik revolution. And so this optional rule attempts to simulate that, or at least gives us the option to choose if we want to include that in our game. So in order for the Russian Revolution to occur, there are 3 factors that must all be true. The first one, 3 or more territories adjacent to Moscow, so we've got Moscow over here, at least 3 territories next to Moscow must be controlled. So contested isn't going to do it. It's got to be controlled by the Central Powers. So it could be any 3. Chances are that if you're going for this, it's going to be Livonia, Belarus, and Ukraine, just because those are along the border and those are easy. But it could just as easily be Belarus, Ukraine, and Tatarstan or something, if for some reason Germany or Austria gets back here. That could count too. Any 3 adjacent to Moscow. You could have more than that. That doesn't impact it, but you have to have at least 3. Now, the second thing that you need to do, at least 1 additional Russian territory must be controlled or contested by the Central Powers. So in this case, we don't have to control it. We can, but contesting counts. So we've got to have 3 adjacent to Moscow, and we have to have 1 additional. Now, if you're marching in through here, Poland is going to be your obvious choice, but it could really be any other territory. In fact, you could have 4 territories that all border Moscow. You've got 3 of them, plus another territory, just any other Russian-controlled territory. Or it's not Russian-controlled anymore, it's one of their original territories. And finally, Moscow itself actually has to be controlled by Russia. So the Central Powers cannot take Moscow. This is because this is considered an internal Russian revolution, and if there are Germans or Austrians or Ottomans in control of Moscow, you can't really have an internal revolution because their capital's already, or the capital for the purpose of this game has actually already been conquered. So there's no way to have a revolution when you've been subjugated. So those are the things, if you want to play with the optional Russian Revolution, how you trigger it. Now, what does it mean? So for role-playing purposes, it means the imperial government has been overthrown and Russia is now a republic. But what does it mean in terms of actual game mechanics? So all Russian units outside of their original Russian territories or Russian-controlled territories are immediately removed from the board. Does not matter where they are, they're just gone. Russia no longer gets a turn either. Central Powers can no longer attack Russian units or move into territories controlled by Russia. Now, if the Central Powers are currently contesting Russian territories at the time the revolution is triggered, Central Powers can freely move into or out of those territories. Now, if they totally move out, then they're not really contested anymore, and they would not be able to move in and out of them. But as long as a Central Power has at least 1 infantry, keeps at least 1 infantry in those territories, they can freely move in and out of them. So your normal rules about moving out of contested territory is that's no longer a factor. Russian units aren't able to participate in any battles anymore. Even in those contested territories, they just sit there. And finally, Central Powers do get to collect income for any Russian territories they control. However, any of them that are contested, they do not get that production. So let's say that Sevastopol down here, for some reason, is contested when the revolution triggers. The Ottomans can freely move through there if it's contested, as long as the Central Powers continue to have a unit there, but as soon as they move one out, they can no longer freely move in there. And the territory does not automatically become Ottoman, and the Ottomans are not allowed to attack the now neutral Russians. Basically, it just remains in Russian hands, and Russia is essentially out of the game, so Russia doesn't collect income, but no one else can move in there. So that means that like England can't come in here and quote-unquote liberate territories in northern Russia. All Russian territories basically off-limits at that point, unless it was controlled by a Central Power or contested at the time the revolution occurred. Now, I'm going to transition just for a moment to tournament rules, which I know we don't talk a whole lot about in this series. I have plenty of other videos that go over tournament rules. However, I do want to mention that with the particular brand they use at Origins and Gen Con, they have what's called economic and political collapse. And it's kind of similar to a Russian Revolution, except any country can be affected by either one of those. Economic, basically, it's trying to simulate that the country is so beaten down, the infrastructure is so damaged, that they're no longer able to effectively move their raw materials and their manufacturing around. So in game, it's simulated as they're not able to collect money or build new units, but they are still able to move their units around on the board. Now, political collapse is even more extreme, and that means that basically the entire political infrastructure, the political system, the police, fire department, municipal, everything basically has ceased to function because there's so much stress, so much stress on the empire or the kingdom or the nation, and that basically knocks the country out of the game. They basically throw up their hands and they give up. So other countries are free to come in and take their territory. Now, that is a little bit different than the Russian Revolution, but it's in many ways it's very similar, that so much stress gets placed on a nation that they get knocked out of the war, just like the Russian Revolution. So you won't find anything about economic or political collapse in the rules, official rules, but you will find that section, the optional rule, about the Russian Revolution. All right, I hope you all have enjoyed this video series. I think we've covered just about everything at this point, though I'm sure there will be questions or things that we just touched on kind of lightly that we could go into greater detail. But with this, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this series. If there is anything major that I've missed that you'd like to hear more about, leave a comment below or on a video if it's related to something that we've talked about in one of the other videos. I'll take a look and respond in the comments if I'm able, or if it makes sense to create an additional video, kind of an addendum or an appendix or something like that video to this series. I would be more than happy to do that. All right, everybody, I hope you all have an excellent weekend.